Hi, everyone. This is Steve Havey. I'm your guest host tonight for this special episode of That Weems Guy. Tonight we have a very special guest. It's Lee Weems himself. Lee, tell everybody about yourself.
Well, hello, I am that Weems guy, and thank you to the magnificent Steve for stepping in to play the part of Ed McMahon tonight. And I guess we should do the Tonight Show theme, and
Here's Lee.
everybody over the age of 40 will know what we're talking about. Um, but I'm Lee Weems. I'm normally the host of this show, but Steve is going to be the guest host tonight and interview me with some questions that he came up with and some that listeners of the show submitted to him. And the reason we're doing it this way is because I'm a guest that I knew I could track down to get booked for this week. And we had a 2 night window on which to get a show done this week, and this worked out very well. And Steve has a very important function in the first person safety organization. Actually, has two very important functions. Number one is he's the director of engineering, and number two is he is my get back coach. And if you don't know what a get back coach is, that's the guy that's responsible for pulling the head coach off the football field before he gets a 15-yard penalty for messing up. And Steve's probably about to tell me to turn it back over to him. So, Steve.
Thanks, Lee. I put out the call last night for questions on the That Weems Guy Facebook page. And if you're not already following That Weems Guy Facebook page, you should be. We got some really good questions. They were buried within a bunch of sarcastic questions. One of the sarcastic questions I will not ask Lee tonight is whether or not Haagen-Dazs is better than Bluebell ice cream. If I ask Lee that question, I will be immediately fired from my job as get back coach and director of engineering, because I've been around Lee long enough to know that there is no question about what is the best ice cream in the world, and it is Brahms. But it did trigger a thought in my mind. How did Lee develop this original affection for ice cream? So, Lee, what started you down the ice cream trail?
Well, I grew up in a very extended family on the same property as my grandmother, who lived in the house next door to us. And on Sundays, we went to either my grandmother's house or one of my great aunt's houses for lunch. I had two great aunts living within a couple of miles of us, and every Sunday after church, we were at one of their houses. During the summertime, when we would be at my grandmother's house, and she would cook, she would fry chicken in a pressure cooker, and she put it out on the carport so it wouldn't heat up the house. And she would also put an ice cream churn out there next to the pressure cooker. So we got expertly grandmother fried chicken and expert grandmother homemade ice cream. And you always knew the ice cream was done when the churn stopped, because that's when it was frozen. So I guess that would be the first, exposure to ice cream being a big special thing. The Brahms thing comes in when I was in second grade. We moved to Oklahoma for a year, and Brahms is an Oklahoma-based ice cream chain. For those that aren't familiar, it's got a market and they serve food and everything there as well. And on Sunday nights, my father would take us to Brahms, and so it's something that I can only get. It's one of those childhood memories, and that I attach special meaning to, and it's something I can only get when I'm in that part of the country. They are in Texas, there are a couple of them in Kansas, some of them in Missouri, and there are two in Arkansas, I do believe. And
So
so
you
that's
like ice cream and you like
yeah,
Brahms.
yeah, and that's the thing. Now the funny thing is that when I graduated from high school, I went to work for an ice cream company. I worked in a warehouse, and that's where I started down the road to being the portly gentleman that I am now. I was rather skinny when I went to work there, and on my first day, we worked in a warehouse, and the ice cream was shipped in from the factory on big pallets, and we put it in the warehouse, and then we loaded it onto the delivery trucks that went out and ran the routes and delivered it. And so I walk in and they say, "Hey, this is Lee. He's the new guy." I jump right in. We're loading a truck. The truck pulls out of the loading dock, and a pint of strawberry had fallen down into the loading dock. And I jumped down there and grabbed it and said, "What do we do with this?" And they say, "Get a spoon." And that's what started me towards the road of portliness.
Now, was that a Bluebell factory?
No, that was a Metagold ice cream
Okay.
factory, which at the time, Metagold had been bought out by Borden, and it's gone defunct now. It started
Well,
off.
with you there,
No. After I
how
left,
much ice cream really fell off the truck versus got pushed?
my rule was I never would break open a package to get something. There was enough stuff that got broken open in all the handling processes. It actually started out as a creamery in South Georgia, and then grew and got bought and sold several times. And Borden Milk Company was the last
Mhm.
conglomerate to own it, and then all of that went under. And
Okay. Well, good. That's a good answer on ice cream.
mhm.
Let's move on along.
All right.
Let's talk about your recent surgery. We had a good
Okay.
question. Both Michael and Brian had questions about your recent hand surgery and how it related to how you carried. So I broke it into 3-4 questions,
Okay.
and you can expound after I'm done with my 3 or 4 questions. What was the total time for your recovery? Assuming are you fully recovered now, and how long ago was the surgery?
Surgery was 7 weeks ago yesterday, and no, I am not fully recovered.
Okay. Would you say but you're back to carrying on strong side,
Yes. Yeah.
dominant side. And
Yeah.
what would you say you are right now? 80%, 90%, 74.3?
65%.
Okay. So 65% dominant hand is better than whatever you had on your non-dominant hand.
Yeah, and the big reason for that is I did go do some live fire testing several times along the way. And when I got to where I could grip the gun and press the trigger and make the shot without reacting to the pain enough that I pulled the shot off of target, I went back to the right hand, not because of skill diminishment for being in the support hand, but the fact that if I got the go signal, remembering intellectually that the pistol was on the left hand side instead of going for it where it has been for 23 years, I went back to strong side because I can handle it for the few rounds that an actual encounter would take. I'm probably still a long ways off for being able to do any kind of high round count class.
So 7 weeks after this particular surgery, you could instinctively draw and deliver those first 2 or 3 shots, probably with more than 65% of capacity. It's because you instinctively would get the shots up and then deal with the pain later.
Right. Yeah. I went recently and fired 23 live rounds because 23 was all I could stand. And I immediately started getting some swelling and some pain in the hand, but I was okay. I was able to fire all of those shots.
Okay.
The biggest issue with it was the swelling in the hand stretched the skin so tight that I had trouble reaching for the trigger and being able to manipulate the finger to press the trigger. And the other part with that, but probably equal importance, is the incision was right in the crease of the hand. And if I gripped a pistol grip, it pressed right on that incision, was extremely painful.
Okay. So let's go back to left hand only or non-dominant hand for all of you that are wrong-handed. Yeah. Because different people have different levels of surgery, and somebody might have their hand amputated even. Right. So when you went to left hand only, you did quite a bit of shooting. You went and took a class, a red dot class, as I recall.
Yep.
Or a pistol mounted optic, because now they're red and green and they're not just dots, they're circles, etc. Right. But you went to a pistol mounted optic class and you shot that left-handed.
Right.
Did you, or non-dominant hand, how much of that was non-dominant hand only versus supported non-dominant hand versus non-dominant but freestyle?
Most of it I tried to shoot freestyle, just so I would get try to get a mirror image point of view. What I found is that obviously my dominant hand is stronger than my non-dominant, and I was tending to pull the gun off target to the right. And so I ended up going to like a crazy, just a teacup type of grip just to help support the pistol, rather than actually gripping the pistol with the dominant hand. I've done a lot of work support hand only. I'm a graduate of the Rogers Shooting School, in which there's extensive support hand only. I've done the Gypstick Semi-Auto Level 3 class, which is basically a Rogers-esque class. as you know, I teach a class that is all, we do a lot of stuff support hand only.
Right.
And so I've done a lot of work with the gun and the support hand, but it all started off on the right hand side and was all predicated on right hand injury. I've got to get the gun out with the left hand. Um, it was different having the gun on the left hand side and starting with it as just a normal, what would be a regular draw.
Did you do some work with it prior to your surgery? Did you start doing some left-handed stuff? About how many rounds or repetitions?
I didn't go fire any live rounds that way because I knew I could press the trigger and be okay. I did do some work trying to habituate my brain to the pistol being on that side, and I can't put a number on how many repetitions. It was just something I would do every so often, just to try to start getting the synapses is okay. That's where the gun's going to be, and then once I was really carrying on that, I did some concentrated dry work, but I would probably 5-10 times each morning before I left draw the gun from the holster as a left-handed initiated draw, just to try to remind my brain, hey, that's where the gun is. The other thing was most of the audience knows I'm a deputy sheriff. I did work plain clothes for the first several weeks and was carrying concealed. So hopefully I wouldn't walk up on something in a convenience store or something like that and be confronted with the situation because somebody saw, hey, here's the cop. So I would have had the added thing of having to clear the cover garment and get to the left hand, which I had never done any left-handed concealment work prior to the surgery. All of my left-handed, I had in classes, and demonstrating from the class. But
would you have been allowed to carry non-dominant side in uniform?
Yeah, I would have
per
been.
department policy?
Yeah, I would have been because, well, one, my job now is I'm behind the wire. Yeah,
But let me rephrase my question.
Yeah.
If you were a patrol deputy and you had this surgery, you wouldn't be out on patrol, would you? Allowed out on patrol?
I probably could have been because I could have gone and shot a passing score from the non-dominant side. And the man that is currently our sheriff at one point in time had shoulder surgery. And so as to avoid going on a light duty thing, went and shot a qualifying score left-handed. So I think I probably could have gotten away with it because he's done that. So
the advantages of a
non-big
city office.
Yes. Yeah. And so it's I think I would have been fine. And I had a discussion with my doctor about it prior to the surgery. Like, look, how long am I going to be out? This is my job and everything. And he basically said for the first week, no. So I stayed off out of work for the first week. And then I went back plain clothes. And it's just, the biggest thing would have been the pain, not necessarily the function.
Right. My question was more from an office. Yeah. I didn't want to say department. Right. From an office policy. Yeah. Would they allow that?
Well, so, I never got anything in writing from a doctor that said I was not capable of working duty. If that had been the case, then I would have had to gone back and gotten released from the doctor to go back to full duty. And that happens from time to time when people they have an injury that keeps them from working and their doctor writes up, this person cannot perform their normal duties. Then they have to get their doctor to release them to come back to duties. My doctor basically said it was up to me. And so it never went into a formal,
Understood. So was there anything you took away from that experience that's going to change anything about your curriculum or add to your curriculum? Anything you found there that's going to change how you teach or what you teach?
I don't know necessarily it's going to change how I teach, but that what is now called pistol craft 4, it used to be critical pistol skills, all was predicated on the thought of your strong hand has been injured, so you're having to get the gun from your dominant side with your non-dominant hand. It was different starting with the gun on the non-dominant side. And that may be something that I talk with students about. It's like, look, when you do some of this work, you may want to do some of that, so you're not having to learn it on the fly. Now, I wanted to be very clear that I do think that those are, what we call 1% skills. That's only something that you do when you've got a pretty good grasp on everything else. And the only time I ever practice those skills is when I teach the class. That is my practice for those. It's not something I spend a lot of range work on, because I can't point to a single private citizen incident which has happened. I can point to law enforcement uniform duty situations and where it has happened, where the
Well,
strong
that's
man
what
got
triggered
injured.
the class, right?
Right.
That
Yeah.
incident with the Gwinnett deputies is what triggered your, or
It
Gwinnett. I
was,
don't know if that was a department or an office, but
actually, it was a Livonia Police Department.
oh, okay.
I think it's Livonia or Franklin. So the same one exit up from where Red Hill Range is.
All right.
That city PD. And that incident's on video. And of course, I knew all the stuff. I'd gone to Rogers before this, and it's all stuff taught. But when I really and truly developed the curriculum is I had some of our staff shoot support hand only in a class. And one of the deputies, who at the time was like a 14-year veteran. So that's the first time I've ever shot with my left hand. And that was when the light bulb went off from my head. So you've never drawn the pistol?
How do I draw my pistol with just my left hand?
Yeah. And so I developed the curriculum, and we started doing it, through the sheriff's office, for the uniform personnel. And then when I first started my business, I didn't want to compete with everybody else that was out there doing this stuff. I thought I would do niche things to kind of make me stand apart. And this was a class that nobody else was teaching. And it's actually the first open enrollment class that I offered. What I quickly found is that doesn't work really well for the business, and you need to be teaching the other classes. And one of the learning processes along the way, and it may go to one of the other questions, is I will never do that class again for people that have not gone through the other classes with me. And that's why it's now Pistol Craft 4. And you will have gone through 1, 2, and 3 with first person safety before you go to 4, because I've had a couple of really bad experiences. Nothing like anybody got injured or hurt or anything.
Well, you
like
stopped
that.
it. You halted the class before that could happen.
Yeah.
You could tell where not to go.
Right. And so I'm not going to take anyone's word for it on their skills anymore. I'm going to have seen it in class on the line. And we're going to have a basis of understanding before we go into that material.
We had of course, I took the first, I was your student the first time you taught that class. I'm pretty sure it was the first time you taught it. And we were very fortunate that we had people in there that had the requisite skills. And they had the ability to not do stupid things with their guns.
That was not the first class. That was actually a couple of years in, the one that you and Doug attended. The very first one that I taught, this is one of those learning experiences, is I thought that pistol and 3 magazines was self-explanatory, that this was semi-automatic pistol classes. And I'm getting out of the truck to set up, and one of the students comes walking up and said, "Hey, my gun doesn't take magazines." So what does your gun take? And it's like, oh, it's the J-frame that I shot in the other class. And I said, have you replaced the front sight? Because the front sight fell off of the gun from in the other class. She said, oh, no. And so here the student was in a class that is all about support hand only draws, clearing malfunctions and stuff, with a semi-automatic pistol, and they've got a 5-shot J-frame revolver. And so we adapted, and for some of the stuff, we let her borrow a semi-automatic pistol to work on. But that's why I've started very clearly spelling it out in the class description after that. And even though I had prerequisites in the class description that I thought were ironclad, no.
No, they don't. It's amazing to people that ignore the prerequisites. And then there are those that complain when you require that they take your level 1 class before you take your level 2 class.
Right.
well, I've taken a level 4 class from so-and-so. Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Send me a video. I don't have
Yeah.
one. Okay. You're taking my class.
Right.
So, all right. Well, let's move on to another question. Brian put this one in, and I know that you addressed it on the Weems Guy, at Weems Guy Facebook page. So for those of you, when Lee mentioned some links here, that's where you can go find them. But best resources for learning pre-assault indicators.
Probably the best readily available to the masses resource is if you go to the John Murphy's FPF training YouTube channel. He has a playlist that is required watching for his concealed carry, street and tactics, whatever the name of it is, class. And in one of those videos is pre-assault indicators. And that's a good video. We actually use it for training in the sheriff's office. When a lot of times when I teach use of force, I'll show that video as well, or have people watch it outside of class, because it does play into the articulation of, I recognize what this looks like and what it means. Okay. And so John's video is probably the most easily available access to everybody, resources to everyone out there, and it's well done.
And so I mean, if it's well done enough for a sheriff's office to use it, then as Tom Gibbons would say, we call that a clue.
Yeah.
So probably be good for you to watch, and then it's available for anybody, even if they're not signed up for the class, to go watch that video. Is that correct?
Yeah. And then, not this calendar year, but last calendar year, I did the use of force training for all of the district attorney's office investigators, and they watched that video. So now we've got that into this is what the DA's office investigators have seen. So I know they'll have that information when it comes to evaluating use of force. John's class, the advanced skills and tactics class, is very well done. I think it's one of the top 3 travel and road shows out there. Unfortunately, John is trying to sell people what they need instead of what they want. And so it doesn't fill up as well as some of the high round count entertainment classes. Very well done class. And if it's coming to you, or you need to go, if it's not coming anywhere near you, which it travels all over the United States because he lives in a motorhome doing this, make the effort to go meet him somewhere. It is an outstanding class. After John's class, Chuck Haggard of I think Agile Training is his business. Chuck does a lot of work on that, and Chuck does it in parallel to his OC spray classes. So you could actually go somewhere and not be a live fire range class. You can get it in conjunction with using OC and other less lethal items that you could take someone to that's not going to go to a shooting class.
That's right. There's lots of people out there that choose not to carry guns, and we all know some of those people.
Right.
And a Chuck Haggard class is really good for getting that kind of.
Yeah. And it may not necessarily be that people don't choose to carry guns. It may be that they work in an environment in which they just can't have them. If you're a college professor or a school teacher, you might be legally constrained. Yeah, it might be legally constrained, or you may have a job that has a company policy and no firearms on the property. Well, guess what? Having a roof over your head and having food in your refrigerator is survival, and you got to have a job to do that. You can say, pull all your stuff out and put it on your nightstand and take a picture of it all you want to, but you still got to have a job. You still got to have the basic means of survival. And so even if there's, again, people that aren't anti carrying the gun, there's still ways to defend yourself, and take anybody to that class.
That's right. Before I forget, and before I get a lot of nasty comments, I want to say that it's not just people that don't carry a gun that should get OC training. It's people that carry a gun. I mean, one of the phrases that Chuck uses is something between a harsh word and a gun. Yeah. And having OC on you is something. If you carry a gun, you should have OC on you. That's my opinion. It's just my opinion. But for those of you that, I know there's many of you out there that subscribe to that. And I don't want you to think that we're advocating Chuck's training only for people that don't carry a gun, because that's not what I'm
Right.
suggesting at all.
Right. Once, probably the other big resource out there would be what we call the ShivWorks Collective in the firearms training business, and that's Craig Douglas, Cecil Birch, and those guys. No, that's going to be a lot more physically demanding type classes.
As,
John,
as,
yeah, John's class and Chuck's class, you can take anybody to. ShivWorks class, you can't take just anybody to.
ShivWorks class, you don't want to mind getting physical,
right?
And and it does get physical, and that's. I mean, the greatest thing I took away from that class was learning that I need to learn all those pre-assault indicators and everything else so I can avoid getting in that situation, because there's a whole lot of people out there that can bend me in half.
Yep. The biggest thing to learn is how to recognize it, the situation before it develops or as it's developing, so that you can take appropriate avoidance tools, avoidance options to try to keep from being in that entangled fight or having to go to your OC or having to go to your firearm. Using force is a last resort. Using deadly force is an extreme last resort.
Yes, indeed. And it brings up a point. I was thinking about this when you used Tim Chandler's line that pistol mounted optics are best at what we do least with a pistol. Shooting the gun is the least a percentage of the time that we use it. We're not going to use the gun that often,
right?
But we're going to use all those other skills a lot more often out in the real world. We practice the gun a whole lot, and it's a lot of fun. To your point about John's teaching people what they need to know, so it's not as popular. Or to use John Murphy, to use John Hearn's term, he provides vegetables along with the meat and potatoes. If people love the meat and the vegetables, not as much. But those are really the skills you need, because you're just going to use them a lot more often. And to your point, you avoid the conflict, and you're so far ahead of the game. All right. The three biggest takeaways you have, one takeaway each from Tom Givens, Dave Spalding, and Larry Mudgett.
All right, I'll start with Larry Mudgett first, in that I don't have the personal relationship with him that I do with Tom and Dave. My exposure to Larry Mudgett would be only the one class that I went and took, along with all that. And there's an episode, or actually 2 episodes, where we were going in depth on that class. The biggest takeaway I got from him was a methodology for translating what I knew in my head to students effectively. Because I had been trying to come up with a way of teaching some of that stuff, and you had been through the early trigger management classes, which that's kind of what we were doing. And then I went and took his class, like, okay, that's the missing link and what I'm trying to do here. And it really transformed the trigger management and a lot of the other stuff that I teach. So from him, I could say just taking away that methodology triggers so many other things. From Tom and Dave, I joked with somebody one day, I've got 2 daddies, and it's Tom and Dave. So much more than just on the range stuff. So many philosophical discussions with those 2 guys. I probably run a class more like Tom. I probably run a gun more like Dave, as far as like in personal skills. I say the biggest thing from Range Masters doctrine and material is getting people's minds wired right, and getting people to understand that it's not a 1 in a million chance. It's a chance every time you walk out the door. And I think that's why the range master student base has been so successful when they've actually been put to the test. As Tom says in class, you have permission to defend yourself. And I think trying to import that is probably my biggest takeaway from Tom. The mechanics of running the gun, I run more like Dave than I do Tom. And that's not saying that Tom's way of doing things is not correct or not as well. It's just,
as you and
yeah,
as you and Justin Dow were talking
yeah,
about
yeah,
2 episodes ago,
yeah,
right? There are
yeah,
different ways to do things,
yeah,
and
yeah,
the longer you're around this,
yeah,
the more you realize that
yeah.
there isn't just one way to do something.
Right. If you trace the origins of the path of where I learned to shoot and came up, they more similarly mirror Dave's than they do Tom's. And but they're both they both all go back to Cooper and the modern technique.
Mm-hmm.
But Dave went through Mid-South. He's gone through some of the other stuff. The people who taught me how to shoot through the Georgia Public Safety Training Center were all Mid-South guys, Rogers guys that had a bigger influence on my firearms training than true gun sight Weaverish. And Weaver's not what everybody thinks Weaver is. Methodology. Mine was more the East Coast version instead of the West Coast version, whereas Tom went a lot to gun sight, and that was very formative for him. I'm very close with each of them personally. Now, I've spent many nights at Tom's house. I have not, gone up and bunked in at Dave's place. Hey, Dave, I'm here for the night. But very deep friendship. I appreciate the time that both of them have taken and personal interest both of those guys have taken to help develop me. And yeah, all the time they take the philosophical conversations. It's always a great day when I get to have a phone call with both of them individually. And it's just being able to bounce stuff off of those guys.
Okay.
Like, hey, this is a situation that I'm dealing with, whatever, bounce it off of them and get their feedback. And that translates immediately out to students in the field as well.
Okay.
And Tom early on took a lot of interest in developing my knowledge base as an instructor. It like gave me reading assignments and the like. And yeah, I can't thank the two of those guys enough.
Yeah. I always like to say I was fortunate that I fell in with the right group.
Right. And I guess one thing I say a commonality of both of those guys is they boil it down to the simplest of things. And that has really shaped, especially over the past year that I've been a year and a half, 2 years since I've been full-time training. Boil away all the nuance, boil away all the little bitty things. Oh, if you do this one little thing, everything. What matters is getting the gun between you and the bad guy and pressing the trigger without misaligning the gun.
Mm-hmm.
That's what matters.
So let's talk about another aspect of training that you and I think Eric talked about, and I know other guests have talked about it. The difference between when we're all on a line firing at a single target and when we're having to deal with outside the square range. The food court's got 2 bad guys and 67 people that don't need to be shot.
Right.
One of my, as you know, I run a defensive pistol match, and it's sort of like IDPA, but there's some things I don't pay attention to. Like in IDPA, you can only have so many no shoots.
Yeah.
The ratio of no shoots can only be half or a fourth of what the shoots are. Well, I don't pay any attention to that. I'll put up a whole bunch of no shoots and make you figure out how to weave your way between. You've done that in class, and it's one of the places I got the idea, as well as having no shoots behind and in front of shoots.
Yeah.
and I know Murphy has some of this in his class, even though I haven't attended the class. I picked up a perception of that. I hope to get to his class in February. And yes, you should go train with John Murphy, audience. And if you haven't, it's just, I mean, if you can only take one class as a civilian self-defender, that's the class that I would recommend that you go take. That's me talking. That's not Lee. That's me.
I'll echo that.
So there you go. But it's also difficult to run a lot of students through those kind of scenarios in a class. And then they've got that downtime. You know, we've done it a couple of times. You've set up the Blue Falcon drill, where half the class sets up a scenario that involves multiple targets, including no shoots, and it's blind for the other half of the class, and then they have to run through it. But it chews up a lot of time, and it's not as much fun as sitting up there burning down the targets. Why isn't there more of that out there in the training community, or is it out there and I'm just not aware of it?
One, it's harder. It's more difficult on the instructor. Number two is the instructor's got to have the knowledge base to do stuff like that. And I'm not trying to, but there is a place for developing technical skill and focus only on technical skill, and the students have to have achieved a certain level of it. But we have to teach our students to function in a real environment. And so we need to be putting them in situations in which they have to process information and think with the gun in their hand or the gun on their holster, you know, actually think and process information. Otherwise, we're just setting them up for, it's only a draw your pistol and burn down the two-dimensional stationary target. And the biggest thing is well, logistically it's hard because you got to have a range in which you can do it. I have not taught that on an indoor range just because it's hard to set it up on an indoor range. There are some that where it would work. And even on some outdoor ranges, it's hard because the way they're constructed, you may have targets that are behind a wooden barrier or something like that, a bullet trap barrier where you can't set up things that have people intentionally putting shots into there. Right. So logistics become a big issue. Number two is the knowledge base of the instructor, I think is whether, and when I say knowledge base is, well, I can't go into that without making people mad, so I'm not going to worry about making people mad, is the understanding of the problem and that it's not all metric based, it's information and processing based. And initially you do get into that whole situation of it's not as fun. And most of us that are out there teaching this, while there's a passion involved, it's also a business. The key thing that the way we do it is we try to keep the students engaged. And I say we because you're a part of that. Keep the students engaged. And that's why we do the half of the class. And then the half of the class that set up the problem are also judges in at everything for when they're watching the students. So you only get a little bit of actual individual student downtime. And that also creates some social time for the students while they're sitting up there waiting for their chance to go. And doing it that way was actually a suggestion from a student. So I guess one of the biggest takeaways that I've gotten from, I know that gets to another question, was we used to do it where every individual student got their own course of fire. And then a student that was in the class said, hey, why don't you divide the class in half and do it? So we tried it the next time and it worked great. I've had students, a couple of students say, hey, I think it'd be better if you just like diagrammed out and set up the course of thing. We just all ran through it. But on the whole, I've had students say actually being involved in setting up the problem helped them process the information and like look at the angles as they're setting up and think about the shooting problems as they were setting up the courses of fire. And they said they took as much away from that as the actual running through the drill. And then once they get to watch the other students, because there's this whole thing about you watch somebody else doing something, you learn as they do that as well.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And what other takeaways from your students over the years, things that, you know,
Terms are not universal. And so we need to make sure that we have an understanding with the student. What the term means to us is the same thing that they mean to the student.
do you have a specific example?
Not so much as the terms. Well, I guess so. The whole front sight focus thing. Years ago, I taught an intro class for some pre-service academy cadets, and getting them ready to go to the police academy. And there was one female officer that I know what she was told in the classroom because I taught the classroom block. I know what the slide says, and it was talking about focus on the front sight, and it had a picture of a sight picture up showing the front sight centered up in the rear sight. And I know we discussed that and everything. Got on the range for the live fire stuff, because it was like a 3-day class that we taught for all the pre-service academy cadets. And horrible performance, like the best scores that I could get out of her, high 30s on a qual course. And at the time I was a corporal or a sergeant, and I called my lieutenant, who was like the lead firearms guy, like, hey man, so and so is just not going to make it. It's whatever. And I was still fairly new in my instructor during. He says, well, you're not a miracle worker. All you can do is give them the information. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give one more try with and see if we can straighten this out. And I had the ubiquitous cop spiral little memo notebook that we all kept in our pockets and everything. And I pulled it out. And I was standing at the range with her, and we're gathered around the table. And I pulled out the notepad, flipped through to an empty page, and I pulled out my pen and I drew a sight picture with the front sight and the rear sight, and the target was going to explain it to her again. And I see this like sudden look of realization on her face. She goes, oh, we're supposed to look through the rear sight at the front sight. Yeah. Well, what had she been hearing constantly? Focus on the front sight. Well, wherever the front sight was, there was no relationship between the front sight and the rear sight when she would put the gun up on the target. Wherever the front sight was, if it was covering part of the target, she pressed the trigger. I was like, quickly, grab your magazines. Let's go back down to the 7-yard line right now. Draw and shoot whatever. Shoots right in the center mass. Yes, you look through the rear sight at the front sight. And so that became a teaching point for me to make sure that the students understand that. I have not personally experienced this one, but I think it was Daryl Bolke that talked about how I had a student that they thought the rear sight was the front sight because it was the front. As
one closest to them.
It was the one
Yeah.
closest to them. It was the front sight. So that's where I think you and the student have to meet at the same terminology. You got to make sure they understand, and that becomes all right, this is what I'm telling you. What are you hearing me say?
Because because 50% of them can get it,
Yeah,
or 98% of them can get it, but
right.
some of them may not. And I think
Right.
we have a tendency to, and a lot of the classes, I would say maybe 80% of the classes, maybe greater than 80% of the classes, are attended by 20% of the shooters.
Yep.
The enthusiasts are going from class to class to class, and that's great. That's great. There's a lot of money there, and it's, if you had to rely on beginner students, trainers couldn't make a living, I don't think, because it just, but you start to assume a certain level of proficiency in your class. They all show up with all the kit and the gear, and they're put together, and they can do things, and you don't have to explain terms to them. And then there's those times where I remember the one time when we learned to be specific in the command. No, I don't want you to give me 10 shots. I want you to give me one shot 10 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, bam, 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 bam. Stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Learning specific language that cuts out misunderstandings is a big one. And then define the term outright. Tell the student, I'm using this term and this is what it means as part of your teaching, instead of just throwing out a term expecting your student to know what it means.
Right.
And yeah, that's a big, because our job is to meet the student where they are. And that's probably the biggest takeaway that and you know, walking from the law enforcement teaching world to teaching in the private citizen teaching world is just, you know, we've covered this in several past episodes. You know, just with the cops, I know they're going to show up with serviceable gear. They're all going to be pretty much with a quality pistol and everything. I understand I don't have to worry about all that kind of stuff. With private citizens, you don't ever know what you're going to get show up on a line. And then things that are just understood. You know, like you shouldn't walk off the line in the middle of a drill and that kind of thing. And so having to learn how to function in those two environments and yeah, I think I've actually got where I function better in the private citizen world than the cop world.
Yeah. Okay. What else do we want to talk about? All right, the zombie apocalypse comes along. You can only have one pistol. You can have one and only one shotgun and one and only one rifle. Which pistol, which shotgun, which rifle, and why? And you can make the two first mods you would make to each of them, if any.
All right, well, pistol would be Glock 19. Just simply due to prevalence and the amount of time that I have on that platform, although I prefer the CZ-P10C through your guidance. I know there's not as many CZ-P10C magazines laying around the world as there are Glock 19 and Glock 17 mags and parts and stuff that I could keep the Glock running. I would be fine with the perfectly stock gun as long as it had something like a decent quality set of sights on it. Not the dovetail protectors that come from the factory on those. If I could have, since you said modifications, I'd be perfectly fine with stock. Now a grip that grip tape or something like that to give me more traction and stuff when I would like to have that with the pistol. I carry basically a stock Glock 19 on a daily basis. Shotgun, an old Remington 870P with rifle sights on the barrel that have been replaced with the Trijicon sights. And I would prefer to have the Magpul furniture on it and Vacomp big dome safety. That would be the thing. Now the rifle is probably the most difficult to choose from because naturally my love goes to lever gun. But if I'm looking at a situation at long term, everything lever guns are actually kind of fragile. And I'm going to go with a Ruger American Ranch in 5.56 that operates off of AR-15 magazines. And it's going to be topped with something like a very high-end 1:8 scope. And it's going to have the compact stock on it from Ruger.
Now, for those that don't know, what kind of action is a Ruger American Ranch?
That's a bolt action.
Okay.
That's a bolt action. And the reason I'm going with that would be if we're long-term everything, I think we're going to run into less problem with that over the long term. But I did specify the variant that operates off the AR-15 magazine, so I can be finding them.
Right. You can pick those up as needed.
Pick those up as needed. And if I get in a fixed position, I can control a whole lot of field with the bolt action rifle.
Hmm.
I'm not worried about the rate of fire in that situation. I got the 870 to take care of that if I'm getting overrun.
Okay.
Um, the optic would need to be a very, very stout, something like a 1-8. Oh gosh, what's Night Force? Something along those lines.
Hmm.
Now I have one of those rifles, an American Ranch, and 6.5 Grendel, and it's got a Vortex 1-8 on it. I would want a sturdier scope than that. The Vortex, that's great for what I use it for. But if I'm in a long-term situation, I'd rather have something sturdier. And 6.5 Grendel, while I like it, I would rather have the more readily available mags and ammunition.
Right. Chambered for those rounds that you'll find
Yeah.
when you find those mags.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned the CZP-10C.
Mm-hmm.
Now, by the time this airs, we will have finished the instructor reunion,
Yeah.
where I will not be shooting a CZP-10C. So, uh, and I like the CZP-10C. I like it a lot. Why do you like the CZP-10C?
Now I buy from a law enforcement distributor, and so the price of what I could get a Blue Label Glock 19 and what I can get the CZ equivalent of that, dollar to dollar. Maybe $5 or $10 difference depending on which shop that I go
Mm-hmm.
to. The CZ comes with a grip that would be akin to if you sent off a Glock grip to have it reduced and reshaped. And so you don't have to spend that money for the CZ. So
Do your Glock 19s have grips that have been
I have one
reshaped?
Glock 19 that came from Tom Givens that was reshaped by Templar Custom. And I don't know if they're still in business anymore.
Okay.
Um, and I love that Glock 19. I can do anything. I can do things with it that I can't do with other pistols, everything. But it also taught me that getting the gun that fits your hand better does have some benefit. While the gun I carry on a daily basis to work is a factory Gen 3 Glock
Mm-hmm.
19. I found myself that Templar Custom Glock became a clutch gun. I could do things. It's one of two guns, the other being a Gen 2 17, that I got where I could do things with them that I could not do with other pistols. And when they became clutch guns, it's like, okay, they have to go in the safe because I have to get to this level of ability with a factory gun.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be just because I've got this special gun, because I don't want to do that in front of students and let them think they have to have that special gun to work with. So the CZ grip out of the box is on par with many of the Glocks that I've seen that have had reductions and
Okay.
reshapings and all that kind of stuff. The CZ P10C trigger on both of my copies is as good or better than Glocks that I've shot that have like Apex parts in them
Mm-hmm.
and other things. So you're getting a grip and a trigger for the same price as what you would have to pay for extra for that to get it on a Glock.
Okay.
The accuracy of the P10C surpasses the first 4 gens of Glock, and it's probably on par with the Gen 5 Glocks that I've shot, maybe still even better than that. The one drawback is that iron sight options for the Glock are far superior to what iron sight options are available for the CZ. Holsters for a private citizen are a non-factor because you can readily find holsters with the CZ. Duty holsters for the CZ are problematic.
Okay.
US duty gear is probably the only quality manufactured duty gear holster out there for the CZs.
All right. Okay. Well, we should get some interesting comments from all the Glock lovers.
Oh, and I'll throw in a couple other things too. Is that the CZ, the P10, I think it's not a direct analog to a Glock 19, even that's where a lot of people put it in. I think it kind of fits the window between a 19 and a 17 because it is a little bit bigger than my 19s, but it's not quite as big as the 17. And you are getting a base fit 17 round mag in that gun instead of a base fit 15 round mag.
Depends on
and they're
which
metal mag.
CZ P10
Yeah.
I think you get.
The
But
P10Cs are 17 round mag. No,
well,
they're 15.
the one,
You're
the one,
right. You're right.
the one I
You're
have
right.
is 15, but you
You're
can
right.
get a base plate on it to get you
Right.
to
You're right.
17
You're
plus
right.
one.
Yeah, it is. It is if you have a flush fitting when it's 15. But the grip is a little bit longer than a Glock 19. They are metal mags. They do eject more cleanly than the Glock
Mhm.
mags do. There's just a lot of things I like about the CZ
Okay.
compared to the Glock. Now, I still walk out into the world carrying a Glock. But as I've often said, if we're having a loser buys lunch match, I'm getting out my pistol batted optic gun, but I'm still leaving the range carrying my iron sighted gun for now. That match is also going to be shot with my P10C instead of a Glock 19.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of having people shoot different guns. I did that today. I was out at the range with someone, and they were shooting their Glock 17 with an optic, and then their other Glock 17 with another PMO on it. And I said, okay, put those away here. And I took out a Glock 19 and gave it to him. And with my ammo, not their ammo, I said, okay, now shoot this. Okay. And I've done that before I've lined up, a VP9, an XDS. Yes, I have an XDS and it runs. A Ruger American pistol, which I think is a highly underrated pistol. It's and then what was the fourth one? CZ, probably it might have been a Glock 19. And I just have them walk down the line and they pick it up and they shoot them. I just want them to understand, to your point earlier, get the gun between you and the bad guy and press the trigger without disturbing the sight picture. And it's going to go where you need it to go, and learn how to do that quicker, learn how to do that faster. So
the one failing point that I see with the CZ right now is if you're going to go with an optic, you're either dealing with adapter plates or you're going to have to send the gun off and have it direct milled by an aftermarket, which voids your warranty and everything. And for a private citizen, that's not a big deal. For a duty carry, that is a big deal. If I could get a CZ direct P10C directly from the factory milled for an acro optic, I would be writing up the policy change right now to submit for approval. That's one thing. Eric and I talked about all that last week on what to carry. I did pick up today a test and evaluation M&P duty pistol directly milled for an acro that I will be doing some testing with.
So you're going to mount the acro that you have onto it, or it's already got the acro mount?
I'm going to put my acro on it and just do some testing with that. And then I'm probably going to get my hands on a 45 Glock model 45 that's directly milled within the next few weeks to do some similar testing with it.
Okay.
The one reason I like the CZ too is with the optic is my natural presentation. The dot on the optic appears where it should be. With the Glock, I have to consciously cant my wrist forward for the optic to be where I can see it. And I don't like having to be in my conscious mind to do that.
Yeah, the things you reach a level of automaticity. So let's tell folks the story about when you demonstrated a level of automaticity that you didn't even realize you had drawn the gun until it was between you and the guy and you were telling him not to move. Let's see. Let me see if I can do the lead into this. You're driving south on Highway 15. You never carry a ticket book. You haven't carried a ticket book for 20 years or so. If you pull somebody over, they're either getting a warning or they're going to jail. That's the only two options, because you don't have a ticket book to write them a ticket. You're in a relatively unmarked vehicle. And all of a sudden, on this 2-lane road, this guy comes flying past you at a high rate of speed. Now, normally you would just try to catch up to him, read the tag, make sure that there's no warrants or anything out. But he was getting away, so you hit the lights. Okay, from the moment you hit the lights, take over the story.
I don't even know where we keep the ticket books. So there's that. So for the last 13 years, I haven't carried a ticket book. A lot of times when I see something like that, I'll blip the lights, and that's enough of a signal for people. Oh, that's a cop. I probably ought to slow down. In this instance, they came by me so fast and were like going off and leaving me that I had to initiate the blue lights and stuff and punch it to catch up with them to read the tag. And I'm behind them, blue lights going, calling in the tag, and they are still pulling away. And so like I really had to get into it to catch up with them. And so I called it in as, I got lights going and they're not stopping. It wasn't really a full chase at that point because I hadn't activated my siren. But I told everybody what was going on, and we got on long straightaway. And so finally I hit my siren trying to get their attention. And as soon as they realized, oh, that's a cop behind us with lights on, they didn't like slow down and come to a slow stop and pull off the side of the road. They immediately pulled off the side of the road at that high rate of speed. And that was like, wow, that's interesting. And I saw them just bouncing down the road. And so I slowed behind them, like pulled over behind them, and I got out. I called out, which stopped, and I hit the ground as quickly as I could because experience just taught me when your wheels stop, your feet need to be on the ground. And so my wheels stopped, my feet were on the ground, and I started walking up to the car, and out all four windows, I see both hands of each person extended. Now there's a front seat, there's a driver, obviously, a front seat passenger, and two rear seat passengers. Out of all four windows, hands extend. And I go, wow, these folks have had some training. This isn't the first time they've been stopped by the man. They've been through some serious traffic stop training to know that's what's coming. And then I notice on one of them what are unmistakably prison tattoos on the hand and wrist. Okay, these boys have had some serious training. And I am walking up to the car, and I do the whole thing that we taught, put the thumbprint on the trunk and everything. I don't know that that's ever actually worked, but that's what I was taught. Put a thumbprint on the trunk, put a thumbprint on the rear windshield as you're walking up in case something happens and they find your car, the car later, they can identify, yes, he was in contact with it. Yeah. So I'm doing that, and I'm walking up, and just as I get to the rear of the car, I see the driver's hands that are sticking out the window. They shoot back to his waistline area, and his shoulders hunch. And from behind, it looked just like an appendix inside the waistband draw. I don't remember drawing my pistol. I don't remember a conscious thought of, hey, you need your gun, you should probably draw your pistol, whatever. My gun was magically where it needed to be, front sight where it needed to be. And I was giving verbal commands that I was not consciously, you should say X. Like they were coming out, and the guy complied. And I back off, and I hold them at that point until other deputies get on scene, and we start calling them out of the car one-on-one. As it turns out, that if we were writing a book or writing two books on how to get shot by the police and inappropriate times to spill your coffee in your lap, chapter 1 would be the same chapter in both books. He had one of those stainless steel coffee mugs, and he was riding with it, resting on his thigh. And somehow through all that whole off-road maneuver, it stayed sitting perfectly on his thigh. And as I'm walking up at that point, it tips over and dumps scalding hot coffee right into his groin. And of course, he reacted. And of course, I reacted. And yeah, turns out all the story was legit. There were a bunch of painters that were on their way. They were late for work and everything. And so, well, I guess the cup of coffee in the groin handles the warning for the speeding offense today. You guys be careful, you get out of here. And I continued on to the range.
Well, good. By the way, I want to mention this to my audience, our audience, your audience. I'm just the guest host. There's a fine line on this episode. Okay. We don't want this to be the most viewed episode for two reasons. One, we don't want Lee to think he's the most popular guest on his own show. And 2, we sure don't want Lee to think I'm a better host. But we have to have more views than anything that John Hearn has ever been on. Okay? So keep an eye out on that Weems Guy Facebook page so that Lee can let you know when you got to the sweet spot on views for this episode. Call your friends, call your neighbors. I'll offer rounds of ammunition, but we got to get these views to where Lee can zing John a little bit, but it's not the most viewed episode.
So we got to get to number 4 is what you're saying.
What you know the numbers better. I don't track the numbers. I listen to the podcast.
Well, there's an episode in which John and Eric Gelhaus are both on the first significant incident episode, and that's currently at number 5. So we got to beat that.
Well, there's one where John's like below number 5, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, because I'm not trying to get ahead of Eric. No, I like Eric. I like John too. You know that.
Yeah.
But when you get a chance to tease John,
of course, and I gotta tell you, that's been one of the funniest thing about this whole accidental show and how it's gone and how the whole messing with Hearn thing has spread and become a thing. And we're like, even like guests that don't know John want to know if their episode's beating and everything. And it's just the response this last week in which, John was supposed to be on an episode and then stuff happened and he wasn't able to get there, even though we'd said in the intro he was going to be on the episode. The comments and stuff that people have left and sent in have just been absolutely hilarious and just played into the whole thing. And John's a good sport and he's a good friend.
He is, and he's a great guy and he's a great instructor. And if you get a chance to take a class from John, you should as well. Yep. And John paid me the nicest compliment I've ever had as a student. We were at Rangemaster a 3 years ago, and John had to step in to teach a class because another instructor couldn't make it. Which class it was and which instructor that was doesn't really matter. And John had already done yeoman's work at the Rangemaster TACCon, as he always does. And I'm in this class along with some other students. And some of the students were a bit of a challenge for John. And on top of that, he was tired. John came up to me after the class somewhere separate and said, "Hey, I just want to thank you for not being a complete screw up in that class." And that's the nicest compliment I ever received after a class. So thank you, John. I do appreciate that. Lee, tell us about any upcoming classes you've got going on.
Oh, we got the Rangemaster reunion this week, but you won't hear about that until this episode, until after that reunion.
It went great.
Place. Yeah, it was fantastic. The next class that I have upcoming, it would be late January, I think January 20th or somewhere around in there. Late January at Top Guns at Terre Haute in Terre Haute, Indiana. I will be the lead instructor for a Rangemaster instructor development course. We currently have one person short of the minimum registered for that class. So if you could get to Terre Haute in late January, it'd be a great time to come to that class. You will be one of the select few in which I taught your Rangemaster IDC.
He's talking to you out there.
That's right. You'll get to meet, there's some interesting people that are signed up for the class that you would get to meet as well. First weekend in March at the Apache Solutions Range in Yadkinville, North Carolina. On Saturday, we have shotgun manipulations class. And on Sunday, we have a social lever gun class. And those are standalone. You can take either or both, which is our preference. But that's those guys that Yadkinville, North Carolina. Stay in Jonesville, don't stay in Yadkinville. Probably will be the only open enrollment lever gun class on the calendar for 2023. As much as I love the lever gun and advocate for it and everything, the classes just don't sell. And I don't take up an open enrollment date with it any longer. I've put it that it's like a contract class. You got to get enough people ahead of time and contract with me to teach that class. We're going to try it there in Yadkinville due to a special request, and we'll see if that person comes through and gets enough people there. But that's close enough to home that that's not going to cost me time out in hotels and everything. If it doesn't make, it doesn't make.
Well, I really enjoyed the lever gun class. You know, I've taken it a couple of times and assisted you a few times, and it's a lot of fun. So if you have a lever gun and you want to learn
Mhm.
what it can and what it can't do,
Right.
and how to run it in that situation where it might be the only thing you've got.
Hmm.
Um, and as you mentioned once, there, if you ask some deputy that's in a pistol fight if he wouldn't like to have a lever gun, he'd say, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't mind having a lever gun right now, so where I can reach out and touch somebody before they can reach out and touch me."
Yeah, I have a friend that he's no longer in law enforcement, but he was involved in a situation where he had his Glock pistol and he had a shotgun, and he was pinned down in the woods by a guy that had an AK-47. And the distance was such that the shotgun and the pistol were ineffective, but the AK-47 was still plenty effective.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, like SWAT team had to get called in to go in and do basically a rescue on my buddy. And when I first rolled out the lever gun, built it as like a patrol rifle class using a lever gun, I got a very angry hate mail from someone. I can't. You're teaching this class. You're going to give people the impression that you think a lever gun is viable as a patrol rifle. Well, that's exactly the impression that I'm trying to give people. And this guy just couldn't understand it. So I contacted my buddy and like, hey, Dave, that day that you were in the woods, if I could have slid up beside you and handed you a Winchester 94 or a Marlin 336, would you have been happy to have it? He's like, oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would have been really happy to have it. And you said a great way of putting it, things they can do and they can't do. I think that pretty much every situation, domestic United States, the lever gun's going to be satisfactory for.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and in a lot of ways, it's going to be better than your typical AR-15, whatever, because you don't have the sight offset, unless you've mounted optics and stuff on it that create it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for an individual. Now, there's drawbacks, is why you wouldn't want to do them for mass issue,
Right.
like a fleet gun. But there are lots and lots and lots of reasons to go. I don't feel hindered by the capacity issue whatsoever. That's just not a domestic concern, in my opinion. Um,
You never know when
yeah,
the need might arise.
yeah,
You have to press it into service.
yeah. And
Even for
that's
those of you that have a safe full of
yeah,
AR platform rifles.
yeah. Now, I got my first lever gun as a teenager. I don't think I've ever told the story on this podcast. Family situation. My father was in the hospital. I was left to take care of the family farm, and we had mares in foal. And my father had a first cousin that he was very, very close to, um, that was coming by to check on me and make sure everything was going okay. And after all that was said and done, he handed me an old Glenfield Model 30 and said, "I'll tell your daddy you're ready for this." And so to me, it was a coming of age type thing.
Mm-hmm.
In high school, I later bought a Marlin 336 with my own money, and that's the one that I still have and still use in classes. Um, and for the longest time, that 336 was the only centerfire rifle I owned. Um, I did not buy a semi-automatic centerfire rifle until all the Katrina stuff. I was like, okay. I mean, I found like a surplus Yugo SKS and a cheap AK-47, and wasn't satisfied with them. And eventually I got into an AR-15 platform because my agency bought them and I had to get proficient enough with them to teach it to, the basic patrol officer use. If I had to fight in my house or in or around my house right now, all things being equal, they're both loaded, ready to go. I'm grabbing the 336.
Mm-hmm.
I know there was a question in the group about 30-30 versus pistol caliber. 30-30. The pistol caliber ones are very finicky.
Yeah, and on the feeding side, I think,
Mhm.
you know, and you've got a lot more experience with lever guns than I will ever have. In the classes that I've been in, either attending or assisting, where I've seen the problems is when people try to run the gun faster than I think it can actually be run. They're trying to get to half-second splits or get the fastest time in class or something. And you can physically damage your gun trying to run it too fast. You get a little bit of bind up or something, and the next thing you know, you've broken it before you could stop.
Yeah, there, with a pump shotgun, we tell you to run the pump like it owes you money.
Mm-hmm.
With the lever gun, there's got to be some skill and finesse in running it. And just little things such as the gun being counted slightly one way or the other affect whether or not the round feeds. And that has been more pronounced in the Remington era of Remington on and Marlin production rifles than say my old rifle that was actually made by Marlin before the
Mm-hmm.
takeover. That's been one thing that I've noticed in the classes. So it's actually changed one of our recommended techniques for an emergency load, depending on your rifle. And we have the students experiment with that. I did handle the other day a Ruger produced Marlin 4570. 1895. Just briefly, I picked it up in a gun shop and I was impressed with it. When the 3030s eventually come out, I will probably be on board and grab one of those.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I wish they had I know at one time there was a pump 3030.
Savage made one, I'm pretty sure.
It's just the whole straight line action,
Mhm.
I think is just a lot more robust.
Yeah.
So speaking of robust and which shotgun for the apocalypse, if I chose a Mossberg, it would be because if I ever broke off the ejector, I have a better chance of fabricating something and putting it in there than I would with a 870.
Yeah, and and it could be changed with a flathead screwdriver instead of.
That's if I could make the part, I can
Yeah.
do it. I can undo the screw and put the screw in. That's the one thing I like about the Mossberg over the 870. But as you know, I love the 870s too.
Yeah.
And 1301's a great one, but
Yeah.
back to if it's the last gun you're going to have, and the only one you can take with you from here to eternity, or as long as you're on the planet, then having something that's least amount of maintenance.
If we're standing in a gun store and there is a Beretta 1301 on the shelf, a new manufactured Remington 870P on the shelf, and a Mossberg 590, and I've got to grab one of those three and run out in the parking lot to fight, I'm going to take the Beretta 1301. It is that's a qualifier. It is the best in production fighting shotgun currently available. Now, your question was, I can have any one that I want, and I did say an old 870P.
Right. I knew why you said that.
The new stuff, I don't want anything new from Remington. Just too many problems with them. It pains me to say that if the 1301 was not in that equation and it was a new production 870P and a new production 590, I would grab the 590. And it pains me to say that.
I understand.
It really does.
I'm
actually hurting a little bit right here.
I picked up a couple of Remington, old Remington. I know they're old because the conditions the stocks were in when I got them. Police Magnum trade-ins, and I like those.
I grew up shooting a Winchester Model 12 and 20 gauge that my grandfather had, and I have an affinity for that design. I've got one in 12 gauge now that was a World War II aerial gunner trainer. And while I love that the feel of that gun in the action, I still am an 870 guy, because that's where I did all of my formative years and formative shotgun training was on the 870. That's what feels right. Yeah, that's just what feels right to me. I can make the other stuff work. And that's one of the differences in teaching shotgun compared to teaching pistol. Okay, you got a bunch of guys on the line and you got a couple of 320s, a couple of Glocks, an M&P, you know, some oddball, something else in there. They all load by putting the magazine in and running the slide. They all unload by taking the magazine out and running the slide. That is
Mhm.
not the case with shotguns. With the Remington, you do this. With the Mossberg, you do that. With a Winchester, you do anything else, because the slide lock buttons or action lock buttons are all in different places on each one of them. Different sequences for taking rounds out of the magazine tube and everything. And it's just, so if you're going to teach shotgun, unless you're going to specify a specific model, you got to know all of them.
Mhm.
You got to know all of them. And occasionally we get some crazy oddball gun that comes to class and we have to figure it out on the fly.
Yeah, I ran into that Sunday night. I had a Panzer semi-auto. I don't even know what the model number was.
Yeah.
It ran fine. Had a Mossberg 930, no problems. Had a Benelli bird gun, kind of long barrel, kind of long length of pull, and he can only take two in the tube and then one in because he still had the plug in it. So we moved him over to the 1301, which is sort of a familiar platform.
Yeah.
But that 930 in any event, unlike the Beretta, when you run the bolt, it'll put a shell in there whether you put it on the lifter or not.
Yeah.
So and that's so to your point. Yeah. There's a slightly different operating system for each one of them. Yep. Let me. No, I won't ask you this next question. Never mind, because I'm not going to set up I'm not going to set up too many problems for you on the internet.
All right.
All right. Anything you wanted to chime in about?
No.
All right. Then while you're contemplating that, I'll throw one more at you.
All right.
I was listening to you and Justin Dial talk about training. And, Justin talked about adapting to the individual, making that individual better. And of course, he did a lot of training in the Marine Corps. You train deputies, and the thought crossed my mind, I got a line of Marines up there. If I got a couple of them that can't get where I wanted to get to, I can say, hey, you, Johnson, fall out. You're heading to the typing pool. You, Smith, get in here. You can change them out. You can, as much as you hate to do it, but you could not let a deputy could not qual. Yeah. It's a potential. But with the civilian, you got to make them as good as they can be. They can't have somebody else step in for them into that role that they may need themselves for that one day. Yeah. And to me, that's one of the things that an instructor has to think about is, okay, I may not be able to get this person to where this other person is, but I need to get them better. Yeah. Greg Ellifritz wrote a great article about, he's sitting in a gun store and nobody else knows, he likes to go there because nobody knows him, and there's some lady sitting there and she's got a brand new gun and a box of ammo, and she's looking all nervous as get out. She probably didn't fit the normal demographics that you'd look for, that you'd see in a gun store. And he's waiting for a lane to open up. He strikes up a conversation. She's pretty sure her ex or her whatever is coming back that night to break in, and she's got to protect herself. And he says, now there's some pressure. Yeah. I said, I've got 1 hour and 50 rounds to get this woman where she could defend herself against something that night. How do we deal with that? So,
in my previous cop administrator days, I did take away a gun from the deputies, let you were no longer allowed to carry a firearm. And that changed a lot of things, job status and everything that went. There was a non-gun toting job that he was able to perform. as far as private business goes, I have fired one student. She's like, no, I will no longer work with you in this case. Now, that doesn't keep them from being able to carry a firearm. It doesn't keep them from being able to go to someone else,
Right.
thing, but it has been a you and I, or you and me, I guess that'd be an object. In that sense, it'd be a nominative pronoun. You and
I know
I
exactly
are
when you fired that student too.
yeah, you and I are no longer in a business relationship with each other,
Right.
and I will no longer be on the line with you and trying to teach you. I wish you success, everything else, but we're done.
Hmm.
I've only had to do that formally. Well, actually, I've done it with more than one student. I did it once with a student over some bizarre behavior issues, and then I did it with another student that I invited them not to come back due to some nothing that happened in class, but the student had been engaged in stuff prior to that I had nothing to do with whatsoever. It's
Right.
like, look, I don't want you associated with my business. So I've done it more than once, but one with a student that I've actually had on the line teaching them stuff is like, yeah,
Hmm.
we're not doing this anymore.
So now I'm going to ask you, and this will be my closing question for the night.
All right.
I'm going to ask you to make a prediction.
Okay.
You're going to be teaching some stuff this weekend or presenting some material this weekend at the Range Master Instructor Reunion. What, without giving something away, what's going to be the biggest surprise for people? Or what's the thing that what's the message you're going to try and convey that's going to be the biggest aha moment or surprise for them?
Well,
We'll see how that matches up.
the biggest surprise will be that loud noise that just took place in the other end of the house. I wonder what that is.
Do you need to pick up that old 870 and go check out that bump in the night?
No, the dog's not excited, so I guess it's okay.
Okay.
I don't mind giving it away, and this will be like one of the other takeaways that I got. Recoil does not matter. Recoil is not a thing, especially in 9mm pistols. And we program our students subconsciously that recoil is a booger bear, or maybe in of Scottish descent, the bogeyman. That recoil is such an issue and that students have to fight it that we subconsciously train them to anticipate the recoil and compensate for that. And that is a leading contributor to missed shots. It is not jerking the trigger at all. There's an exercise that the students will do on Sunday in the reunion, and it's part of the trigger management class. And I always ask the recoil question when they get done with that particular drill. And it's kind of funny to see the responses and their realizations on their face. And as that is an instructor development course, because everybody attending the reunion is a certified instructor. I think that's going to be a way to impart some stuff and maybe get some people to look at what they're teaching and how they're presenting stuff. Because my classroom block on Saturday, one of the things will be as a slide is what is the definition of learning? And that the definition that we're going to use, that we're going to assign to learning, is a persisting change in knowledge, skills, or attitude. That's been a persisting change in my knowledge, skill, or attitude, is that recoil just doesn't matter. Yeah. If you were trying to chase grandmaster or master, split times matter.
Right.
On the parking lot defending your life, there's not much difference between a 0.35 and a 0.25 or a 0.45 or whatever. There's not a whole lot of difference in that. What does matter is if you miss the shot. That takes a lot of time. because then that doubles your split time.
You can't miss fast enough.
Can't miss fast enough.
All right. Well, Lee, thanks. You've been a great guest tonight. We really appreciate you. Speaking for Lee and myself, we really appreciate you being on the show tonight. Folks, we want to thank you for joining us. We know that your most valuable asset is time, and we appreciate that you chose to spend it with us. Good night.